Hey, what's up again, everybody? It's Carpo again. Well, I thought I'd make a video and talk a little bit about psychedelics and nature, and I don't have any notes. Sometimes I have a few notes, so at least I have an idea of what I'm going to talk about, or at least I've thought about it, but really I intended to make a video about nature. My oldest son, it's his 25th birthday today, and I took him out for lunch, and we were eating breakfast, talking about remembering our lives and how important it is to remember these moments in our lives, and how easy it is as we get older to forget the important moments. And we might have little glimpses. You remember parts of your wedding, you remember parts of your childhood, you remember parts of graduation, whatever it might be. But in the long run, we tend to forget most of what we think we remember. And the things we do remember, our brains get obscured. And interestingly enough, I was talking about photography and why I love taking pictures. I'm an obsessive photographer. I video and film everything. I took like dozens of short nature videos yesterday, and I have these intentions in my mind of one day putting them into a video, but I never do. And it's just too much work. But at the time, I like to document where I'm at. And it led me to have that discussion with him about forgetting parts of our life. Well, this leads me into the next part of my discussion here, which is this connection with nature and photography. Natural photography is what I prefer. I like flowers, sunshine, interesting angles, and mushrooms. And then when I came back here, there was the latest Paul Stamets interview on Joe Rogan, which came out today. And Paul Stamets is one of my favorite speakers. And every time I do a video like this, there's always at least a few new subscribers who don't realize that I'm a major psychedelic fan. From the first time, I took LSD back when I was a teenager, I was just blown away by what I learned about myself and my world. So before I go any further, I should make a disclaimer that I'm not promoting any use of illicit substances. Please don't take anything I say as an inspiration to take anything that you shouldn't take. I don't know what else I can really say about it. I don't want to be responsible for somebody else's bad trip or bad experience, or hurting or harming themselves because they're foolish. But the understanding that psychedelics have given me in my life is what really leads me to understand and want to understand the connection between all of the plants, animals, and nature. How the mycelium interacts between the mushrooms and the trees, and the communication between the trees and the sky to form clouds through evaporation off of the leaves. Yeah, forests can call in storms, if you will. And the more we learn about our world, the more we realize how intelligent it really is. And so many people have seen this clearly for what it is. Psychedelics seem to open a door a little bit further and allow you to really not just understand the truth about nature, but to feel it and be part of it. Now, this is coming from my own perspectives, of course. I prefer psychedelic mushrooms because they have given me the most insight into my life. When I was younger, I might take a few grams at a time. At one time, I decided it was time to do the heroic dose, which as quoted, of course, by Terence McKenna. But that was a 5-gram dose, and I did that a couple times. And then with my friend, we split 15 grams one time, or 14 grams, so we took 7 grams apiece. And that was my most intense experience. We laid out under the stars in our sleeping bags, and the next day I was renewed. And when I was younger, these experiences left a lasting impression on me. But it wasn't until recent years when it finally became almost acceptable. Because now I'm talking about psychedelics and making a disclaimer because they're illegal. In the future, this may not be true. They've already decriminalized in Denver, and in Oakland they're voting on basically they want to decriminalize everything that is from a natural source. Ayahuasca, mushrooms, cannabis. They basically won't prosecute because they don't have money to prosecute. They don't have enough money for prosecution, so they won't even arrest you for it because it's a waste of the taxpayers' money and time. More and more cities are going to pick up on this, and eventually you're going to be able to go in and buy mushrooms in the store, just like you can over in Europe, and have been able to for a long time. And just like I can buy cannabis down the street and come home with a jar of cannabis for free, for legal, not for free, legally. And, you know, my first psychedelic experience was when I was about 15 years old. It was back in like 94. And some friends and I got a hold of some LSD in Portland. And boy, my life changed quickly. You know, I remember that night, I wrote a bunch of notes down, and I still have those notes. And I remember looking at these knots in the wall, these knots in the wood, because it was knotty wood. And the knots were all speaking at a different tone. And, you know, we were listening to music in the garage hole, we called it. It was my, like, half garage that I used as my bedroom. Listening to, you know, whatever, great, Jimi Hendrix or whatever we were listening to at the time. I think that's before we discovered the Grateful Dead. And at a point, we got up, and I went up on my roof, and I remember talking to my friend. There were these moments throughout the night. But at one point in the night, right before dawn, we went down to this train trestle. And it was right down on the Willamette River between Lake Oswego and Milwaukee, south of Portland. And it was one of those large trestles that were about a century old or more, and it had the two large curved girders on them, you know, and the girders had these ladders that went up to about a third of the way up and then stopped where it got flat enough so a worker could shimmy across it. And they were about maybe a foot and a half wide, and it was about 200 feet down from the top to the water. So we climbed up. I climbed up there and sat on the top. I can just feel it in my bones now, just thinking about how stupid I was as a kid to climb up that high. But I was a kid, and I watched the sunrise. I remember I was so engulfed in this sunrise. It was just tears running down my cheeks. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And when it was up, I was reborn. I just felt so reborn. And I turned to look at my friend who had been standing down below, and he was nowhere to be seen. And I hear this, "Hey, fried guy!" And I look way down on the shore, and he'd managed to go all the way back down the bridge, climb all the way down to the shore, and he was just standing there on the rocks. And then we got back together, walked to the other side, walked down along the shore, and I grabbed one of those white flowers that come up with a bunch of different, from one stalk into a bunch of different little white heads, usually with a little purple flower in the middle. And I remember just spinning it, and just watching the colors spin, and just whoosh, these swirls. And that was just the beginning. I didn't even try mushrooms for several years after that, because they weren't really around. LSD was everywhere. Around 2000, there was a major bust up in, I believe, Canada, or maybe it was northern Washington. There's a whole story about it. I think Vice did a show about it, but most of the LSD in the area was coming from that area. So it kind of disappeared, dried up. So mushrooms became popular again. And that was when I really started to understand how different mushrooms really were. They are what I call demanding. They demand something of you. Whereas LSD I can take and maybe wander around, laugh with friends. Mushrooms I can laugh, but I tend to just want to just melt into the couch. I don't really want to move, and even if I do, it's a very heady personal experience to me. But more than that, I take psychedelics as extremely sacred. And you know, as I was saying, I was listening to the Paul Stamets Joe Rogan interview. I'm only halfway through it, but they were talking briefly about lion's mane, and I got really into a variety of different mushrooms in the past. Still have them on my website, I try to take them when I can. Lion's mane, red reishi, and chaga. I mean, they're phenomenal, but eventually they got into talking about psychedelics. And as I remember, my wife sent me the clip, actually, which is how I knew the episode was up. It was about psychedelics and psychosis, and how certain people taking psychedelics, it can cause a sort of trigger of psychosis in your brain, especially those who are between the ages of, say, 18 and 25. Anyone who may be likely to be schizophrenic, bipolar, have psychotic episodes, breakdowns, anxiety, these things may be triggered by an overuse of psychedelics. And I've seen this personally in a couple different people in my life. It can actually really wear you down if you abuse it. And a lot of people who take psychedelics, they take them far too often. It's like Stamets says, he might take them once a year. And that's about how I feel about it. Maybe once, maybe twice a year. Depending on the substance, you know, it depends on the circumstance and where I'm at. But I try to be respectful. These things have shown me a world not just a delusional world, but a world of understanding where I can make sense of the world to myself, where I understand that there is more to it than going to work and coming home. These are the things you see on these substances. You start to realize that you're wasting time making money to feed your family when you could be spending time with your family, for example. That's just one of many. Everyone has to work. That's not the point. The point is some people are workaholics because they think that that's what is the best thing to do for them. Or some people feel like they have to be the best at everything. Or that they have to keep producing or growing or getting better and better because of the self-image. And then a psychedelic experience breaks down those walls. It makes you less likely to fear yourself or to fear the lack of what you have. It makes you more likely to stand up and be proud of who you are instead of feeling like you're not good enough. And it's been shown now in clinical trials, especially at Johns Hopkins University, that drugs such as psychedelics like LSD or psilocybin, as well as MDMA, which is one that I can respect as well, have been shown to have antidepressant properties that are long-lasting. And I've confirmed this many times. Once in a while, when I feel like I'm a little lost and I'm just a little too far behind on figuring out what I want to do next, an experience like that can jolt me out of my false reality and go, whoa, wait a minute, I was on the wrong page. Go back, start over here. This is what's important. While at the same time, inspire me to be more creative and want to be more productive. That's the thing. It doesn't pull you away from wanting to be productive. Like this whole idea of the hippies in the 60s, how they just wanted to take psychedelics and get high and not do anything. That's complete bullshit. People who don't want to do anything won't do anything, regardless of what drugs they take. There are creative cannabis users, creative alcoholics, creative heroin users. I mean, the history of music and art are littered with these experiences. But psychedelics are very unique. I mean, just look at Alex Grey, right? And if you don't know who Alex Grey is, come on. Get on there and start looking. His art is amazing, and it's very inspired by dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, which, in my personal experience, is... Terence McKenna described it as being loaded into a cannon and shot to the moon. I can't much think of a much better description. The problem with that is, in my experience, you can't absorb and assimilate the experience in a way that can be utilized in your daily life. In my daily life. Everyone's unique. I've talked to people who said that DMT changed their lives. But usually when I ask them for specifics, they say it changed their life because they realized there's something more out there. And this brings up, I didn't even want to mention DMT, but I have to, because people always ask, well, what about the little creatures you see, and the elf creatures, and the sprites, and the guys dancing around? And if you've never taken it, you don't know what I'm talking about. If you have, you're saying, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's these universal experiences a lot of people have. Well, if you break it down and look a little deeper, many of these visuals people have are very specific to their environment and expectations. I believe that the mind manifests these hallucinations, but there's still part of me that says maybe it taps in to a different frequency. In other words, your reality is formed by a certain connection of neurons. And psychedelics may alter the way that these neurons communicate, in which you're able to see things differently. This has been shown with psilocybin and LSD, that it not literally, but it almost literally removes the barriers between different parts of your brain that usually don't communicate. You have to compartmentalize things. You have to stay focused on this or that. It eliminates the ability to really stay completely focused when on high doses. But at the same time, you can close your eyes and your thinking pattern is completely coherent. You can sit there and speak to a friend and say, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. You don't have any slurring to your speech. You're not sounding like an idiot or babbling or mumbling. Sometimes, on very high doses, yes. But that's what the glossolalia. There's terms for all of these things, and only extreme psychonauts really know what I'm talking about when I say glossolalia or, get into these deeper terms. But I want to make psychedelics in a way, accessible. I'd love to see them accessible to the people that need them and want them without the fear that's associated with them from the preconceived notions about how dangerous they must be. The stories of people jumping out windows, it's no different than the stories of how cannabis rots your brain. literally rots your brain. I mean, the kids believe this shit. I grew up in the 90s. When I first tried pot, I was about 14 years old. So it was 92. No, 1990, sorry, or 89 or 90, I think, when I tried cannabis the first time. And I remember the stories, but even back then, and the movies and the shows they were showing us in school. And I probably would have never tried cannabis if they hadn't, well, I would have, but I wouldn't have tried it as soon as they hadn't sent me to a class about drugs when I was in 8th grade, I think. I'd never touched drugs, never had any interest. And because I had a mullet in the back, and I wore all this kind of, rocker skater clothes, and I didn't even skate yet, they sent me to this class, and I learned a lot more about drugs in that class than I ever would have if I never took it. So, thank you, by the way. Carol Moore was the lady who ran the thing. Carol Moore was the drug counselor in Lake Oswego School District, so I appreciate her efforts. Uh-oh, my phone's ringing. But I don't answer phone calls. Whoop, a lot of people don't know that. I don't like phones. I've never liked phones. And maybe that's a perfect way to finish this. All of us have our own little things and quirks. We're all weird. Psychedelics allow us to kind of accept that in a way. My thing about not talking on the phone, I have a little bit of social anxiety on the phone. And instead of trying to conquer it, I've just owned it. I haven't answered the phone in months, unless it's his school calling or something. Or my wife. But beyond that, it's just kind of who I am. I like to hide out. I'm kind of a hermit, and I'm a little bit antisocial. I get kind of panicky when people show up at the door. I don't know why. Maybe it's because in the past I did get in trouble for psychedelics, and I was on probation, and because of getting busted with these mushrooms on my way to go camping. Okay, this is the next story. I'm going to tell you one more story. I went out with Michelle, my wife's nephew. His name's Kurt. About 10 years ago. We decided to go out to the Wallowa Mountains and go on a hike for like 3 days. And so we hopped in his pickup. I was getting ready to leave, and I put all my weed in a canister, and I was growing weed at the time, I think. And it was really stinky. I didn't have a cap for the film canister, so I just put it in my bag, said whatever, let's go. So we headed out on the road. Turns out he's going like 80 miles an hour down 84 going east. And woo, woo, woo. Like, fuck. Cop pulls us over. I didn't think anything of it because I'd smelled it the whole way. Cop pulls him over, goes up to his window, asks him for his license, and says, "So how much marijuana you got in the car?" We're like, "Oh, no, none." Now I didn't want to get him in trouble, so I said, "All right, I have a little bit." And he's like, "Get out of the car," and I handed it to him. And I was like, "Yeah, I was just going camping, And so he's like, "Well, I'm going to have to search the other side of the car." And there were guns in the car, I'm sure, because we were going camping, and I was a felon at the time for pot from like years ago, just for having a couple plants. And so I was afraid that I'd get busted and go to jail, so I let him search my bag. Sure enough, he finds some, not Xanax, but I had some Ativans that somebody had given me, and I was anxious at the time. I had anxiety at that time in my life that I wasn't able to overcome. So he's like, "Oh, you have a prescription for these?" I was like, no. And he took them, and then he's like, "What's this?" And it was a bag of mushrooms, psilocybin. I was like, fuck, forgot those were in there. And he goes, "Well, that's a felony, right?" And my heart sank. I'm like, "A felony?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Well, how much is a felony?" He's like, "Any amount of psychedelic mushrooms is a felony." I should have known better, but I didn't. So he's like, "I'm going to have to take these." And I was like, "Well, what are you going to do? Are you going to arrest me?" I was like, "You're going to ruin my whole weekend." I gave the cop shit. I mean, at that point, I knew I'd be in trouble. And he's like, "I'm not going to arrest you." He's like, I'm going to put you in handcuffs. I'm going to write you a summons, and then I'm going to let you go so you can enjoy your weekend. And after he'd done all the work, I was like, "Can I have the pills back at least?" He's like, "No, I can't give you those back." I was like, "Please." I was like, "Dude, you don't understand. I already have anxiety, and now it's worse." He ends up just going, "Here." And he just handed them to me. And the funny thing is, he handed them to me right in front of his own dash cam, like between our cars in the headlights. And I thought, and then when we went to court over it, he made some bullshit up that I hadn't said, where he told me that I'd asked for my drugs. He said in the report I'd asked for my drugs back. And I thought, what a dick. I should tell them that he had given me my drugs back when he would have got reprimanded. But anyhow, the mushrooms got taken. He even told me, "Well, you could probably get weed at the next gas station." So I was like, we were pissed, got in the car, drove down to the next gas station, got gas, and I just yelled, "Anybody got weed?" And this dude, a pump over, is like, and I met him in the back and bought a 1/4 ounce of pot. And the big joke was, yeah, this cop probably steals weed, drives it to his nephew down at the next exit, and then goes back and busts somebody else, and it's a continual rotating thing where they're selling weed back to other people. But anyhow, we got out there, we had a good time, and I didn't have my mushrooms, but it was kind of a moment where I really realized how damaged the system was again. Like I felt like a fool for getting busted. I should have been smarter than that. I know to never let a police officer search me. I know to plead denial. Say, you don't know what you're talking about. We ran over a skunk. Eat shit, cop. And that's how I feel, because I have a strong resentment, an extreme resentment towards cops who bust people for things that they don't need to bust people for. In other words, if somebody's acting like a complete fool and they have drugs on them, that's one thing. If you're just trying to bust somebody because they're possessing a drug, whether it be a psychedelic or anything else, you're just wasting my money. You're wasting taxpayers' money. Putting people in prison for things like that is just causing more problems. And that's why so many cities are decriminalizing. I mean, I foresee a future where all drugs are legal. And a lot of people think that's absurd, but the idea that having drugs legal increases the use of them has been shown over and over not to be true. The amount of people in a society who do drugs is dependent upon the society, not upon the availability of legal drugs. People will always get whatever they want, regardless, whether it's psychedelics, heroin, marijuana. Over and over, this is shown to be true. In every area where drugs have been decriminalized or legalized, there has not been an increase in use. And if so, very slight, even with cannabis. I know there are groups and organizations out there trying to say, oh, there have been more marijuana crashes from people smoking marijuana now. Maybe that's true, maybe not. But the point is that we didn't have a way to test. It wasn't as common for us to assume that that was the cause, and most people wouldn't admit it even if they were smoking. But now they're trying to do dip test kits for driving under the influence. My point here is that some drugs are worse than others. Stay away from methamphetamines and cocaine, and God, stay away from heroin and fentanyl. I mean, but when it comes to cannabis or psychedelics or ayahuasca, LSD, I mean, these drugs can actually be very beneficial for some people. So I'm going to have to go pick up the kids pretty soon. My alarm's going off. I just wanted to get that video out there. If you have any comments or questions or anything to say about psychedelics, please leave it in the comments section. And please don't take anything I say as advice. And please don't send me an email asking me where to get mushrooms or acid or anything else. I have had people send me those emails more than a few times, and I always tell them the same thing. These are illegal. These are felonies. I have no idea. I mean, when I do these substances, it's maybe once or twice a year, and I usually acquire just enough for myself and whoever I'm with. And my last note would be, if you are going to experiment with these things, please do so in a safe environment until you're experienced enough to feel like you can go somewhere to a concert or anything else. That's not really my thing, going to concerts, because I like to be private, but be with somebody else that you love and respect and trust. Anybody that anybody that you can actually trust, that's very important. And if you're not sure, you should have a sitter, somebody who is sober to watch over, just in case you have a problem. And don't panic. I've seen people panic on mushrooms twice and want me to call the cops for them. And I said, no. You just sit back and chill. 10 minutes later, they were fine. You can really go a little too far. I would say start small and be smart about it. And I'm only saying these not as advice or dosage advice here, but because people are going to do it anyway. This is why we have the website Arrowwood, which is, God, I actually donated to them like 10 years ago and got a shirt, and it's like one of my favorite old shirts. It's all beat up. It has all the schedules of drugs across the front. And of course, psychedelics have been in Schedule 1 forever, whereas cocaine and amphetamines are in Schedule 2. Yeah, methamphetamine is less of a charge than acid, than mushrooms, and it's been that way. So, and it will continue to be that way. I won't even go into the details on this issue. It's become so absurd that it's time to legalize. It's time to make these psychedelics available for the people that need them and want them, just like all drugs. And the advantage to this is, with the right dosage, we don't have to wonder how much we're taking. If you take mushrooms, you might know the dosage. You might know about how strong mushrooms are. Most of us can gauge that by weighing it. But on LSD, you have no idea, not just how much acid is on that tab you're taking. You have to wonder whether or not it's even acid. So if anybody out there is planning on taking something, I highly, highly urge you, especially if it's on paper or in crystal form, like MDMA or MDA, get a test kit. Get a test kit before you take any of it. Because kids are taking cathinones that are posing as MDMA, and these things are the ones that can cause you to overheat, have all kinds of problems, and they're not as enjoyable, they're not as insightful. Whereas MDMA will turn purple if you use a Marquis test, which is basically you just put a tiny amount in a little beaker thing, and you put one drop of this liquid on there. If it turns purple, it's in the MDMA class. And they do have reagent kit tests for LSD and other psychedelics as well. What you don't want to be taking is N-Bohm or some of these other psychedelic compounds. I preferred 2CB, I very much enjoyed it, but I only took it a couple times. It's a little bit harder to come by. The last psychedelic that I guess I should talk about before I go would be mescaline. I've only taken mescaline twice. A friend of mine a long time ago made some, and he had a little lab, and he made some mescaline citrate, which was just a white powder in a capsule. So it wasn't taking cactus, it was just taking, the mescaline. I took it to Bonnaroo with me in 2009, and I took it right before the Beastie Boys came on. And it kicked in right as the Beastie Boys were jamming, right as they finished. Then Fish came on after them, I believe. And I just remember standing there crying as Velvet Sea played, which is one of my favorite Fish songs. And just like I was just so enamored by the surroundings. And I went back to my camp, had this amazing evening, fell asleep, woke up in the morning at about 8 o'clock, looked outside the tent, and the ground was still moving like an ocean. I mean, that stuff had legs. That was absolutely epic. But these are all revered substances. It shouldn't be about the visuals, but the visuals are a byproduct of the experience. And I would like to say that I'd like to sit and talk for hours about visuals and all these different components of the psychedelic experience, but I really have to get ready to go. So thanks for listening. If you're interested in these things, let me know. And maybe I'll make another one. Thanks for my patrons, thanks to my subscribers, and be sure to leave a comment. Peace out.